Watch this.
He said it, then said he didn't say it. Then he was sued over it and still wouldn't say he wouldn't stand behind it. Now a judge has stopped him from doing it. So we're going to talk about it. Again, Idaho's abortion law and Idaho's Attorney General. The sound of emergency sirens can be scary, but they can also be taken for granted. In smaller towns across Idaho, there's a struggle to even keep one ambulance in service. Most of us have more than a couple computers within reach at all times. Maybe it's in your pocket, or on your wrist, or in your lap. But maybe you're old enough to remember a time before computers, or maybe when Boise got its first one. It caused quite a stir a couple of months ago and made national headlines. Idaho's AG takes aim at interstate referrals for abortion. This catchy turn of phrase was written after Raul Labrador wrote a letter to State Representative Brent Crane offering his opinion on whether a doctor can refer a patient out of state for the procedure, whether that act violated Idaho's new abortion ban. The one that says the license of any healthcare professional who performs, attempts to perform, or assists in performing or attempting to perform an abortion is breaking the law. They could have their license suspended or revoked. It's the use of that word assist that likely led to Labrador's letter, which he later claimed wasn't an opinion, just a letter, in which was written the state's top law enforcer's interpretation of a controversial law on AG office letterhead. So a lawsuit was filed over the letter and the idea. Planned Parenthood, on behalf of two doctors, wanted a court to weigh in on the First Amendment issues and free commerce. And late yesterday, a federal judge did weigh in, putting a stop to the possibility of prosecuting a doctor for sending a patient out of state for health care, at least temporarily. An injunction while the lawsuit plays out. Here's Joe Paris.
U.S. District Judge Lynn Windmill says Idaho's Attorney General cannot prosecute medical providers who refer women for abortions out of state, at least for now. Judge Windmill raised a collection of concerns, primarily with First Amendment rights. AG Raul Labrador was asked in late March for insight on Idaho's criminal abortion laws by Representative Brent Crane. In that letter signed by Labrador, it is highlighted that Idaho law prohibits doctors from assisting to attempt or perform an abortion. The letter from Labrador says, quote, "The plain meaning of assist is to give support or aid. An Idaho healthcare professional who refers a woman across state lines to an abortion provider has given support or aid to the woman and has thus violated the statute." As Planned Parenthood filed a lawsuit over this letter, Labrador rescinded it. In a response, the AG expressed that Representative Crane had requested a response on behalf of Stanton Healthcare, an anti-abortion healthcare group. Lawmakers are supposed to request law insights for themselves in their lawmaking role, not as a middleman for political groups.
The reality is we should have never been here in the first place.
Rebecca Gibron is the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Great Northwest. They have worked with medical professionals around Idaho that fear prosecution based on Labrador's letter. They have a real fear that just talking with a patient about getting an abortion in a place like Oregon, it could cost them their medical license. Judge Windmill touched on the concern in his 60-page opinion, saying, quote, "The court finds that the medical providers are likely to succeed on their First Amendment cause of action."
Labrador had every opportunity when we were in front of the judge to disavow the opinion, and he absolutely refused to do so. And the judge called that out in his ruling.
I reached out to Labrador's office for comment, and they tell me, quote, "In his 28-year career, you'd be hard-pressed to find a time when Judge Windmill has ruled against Planned Parenthood, so his decision is not surprising. Judge Windmill wants to restrain a power we don't possess. We strongly disagree with his order." Gibron disagrees. She thinks the judge was fair in the assessment. Labrador just doesn't like it.
I think for far too long, extremists in this state have been creating harmful laws with no checks in place. And at the first sign of accountability, they cry foul.
Labrador's office filed this appeal to the decision on Tuesday. Gibron says no surprise there.
The fact that he's appealing the ruling at all tells us exactly what we knew all along. Labrador is intending to attack and go after providers in the state of Idaho.
The court gave both sides of the issue 2 weeks to prepare for the next phase of proceedings. Again, the injunction is preliminary. On a related note, by the way, today, political leaders from more than 20 different states filed paperwork challenging a new Idaho law that criminalizes traveling for abortion. Abortion trafficking, we've talked to you about this on the 208, made it a crime for adults to help minors travel out of state for abortion care. State of Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson filed a multi-state amicus brief urging the U.S. District Court in Idaho to block the law altogether. They argue that it endangers minors and also infringes on things like interstate travel and First Amendment rights. But Brian, what we're really seeing today on a few different notes is that the state of Idaho really is this proving ground for abortion laws. What will hold up in court? What will not hold up in court? How can you phrase something? So a very interesting time to be an Idahoan.
And what's interesting about this is Mr. Labrador feels like it's okay for him to say it out loud in a letter, but not really wanting to say it in a courtroom to a judge, what he believes in when it comes to this assisting part of the law.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that comes up in court and if there's arguments made and, you know, you find out exactly what does he believe and why.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe. You know, the pandemic gave us all sorts of new household terms. You could probably include essential service in that list if you already haven't already. It's actually already, though, been in the public domain lexicon. For example, it differentiates police and fire from other priorities that are deemed kind of less essential. However, last legislative session, Idaho lawmakers made a pitch to add another service to that essential list. They want to include emergency medical services. Senate Concurrent Resolution 101 says Idaho's EMS workers are under added pressures, and they have a growing population to take care of, and of course the costs are skyrocketing. Resolution asks Idaho Department of Health and Welfare to identify problems across the state and bring legislation next session to fix those problems. Health and Welfare has since been working with all 44 counties to learn about those problems, the service gaps, the needs. You can add whatever you want to that, which you can imagine looks differently depending where you look. Andrew Bartline gives us a glimpse of how it is handled in one rural community.
It's kind of a mixed bag.
Mostly agriculture, a lot of open space out here.
Few call it home.
About 5,000 people, not a big place. That's Lincoln County in a nutshell.
All accompanied by what seems like the appropriate infrastructure.
Because there's one red light.
Due to factors out of their control, people are kept in line. But in this line of work, there's no time for that.
People don't realize they need us until they need us. So
Corey Krause is an EMT based in Shoshone.
it's satisfying, you know. You see people out that you helped out in the community and they say, hey, thank you for saving, my life, or hey, thank you for coming out and listening.
But sometimes, they're the ones that need to be heard.
Right.
Mark Essery's the director.
On a state level, there's not dedicated money to ensure that EMS services exist either statewide or in a county.
Local hospitals or private companies can take up the service. Lincoln County doesn't have either.
As an example, the county subsidizes us about $100,000 every year just to keep the ambulance service going.
If you were a private entity, would you create a business like this in this area?
Would I do it in hopes to make money? Not a wise move.
So then whose responsibility is it to make ends meet so services exist in remote areas?
It's a good question. We could always pass the buck, right?
If there's even a buck to pass in the first place.
I'm kind of a training ground, and I understand that. Our starting wages for EMTs is not much, less than $11 an hour, believe it or not. Our advanced EMTs make a little more than that, $16 or $17 an hour.
Salary actually takes up a majority of their budget, leaving the equipment as an afterthought.
None newer than 2012. I've got to start thinking about replacing these things.
Which costs money
Hook people up to,
they don't have.
this is the only ambulance in service right now for this entire county. Now, running 2 calls a day, that's about right. But we get that third call, one of my folks in Richfield will leave their job to go get on an ambulance
A volunteer.
to respond to the call.
And that happens.
And that happens.
A mixed bag where it gets far worse.
Right.
Wayne Denny works at the state EMS Bureau.
Yep.
And he's the chief.
There are a number of EMS agencies in the state that get by year to year on bake sales. I mean, they literally don't have the budget to keep diesel in the ambulance.
His job is to find solutions to create sustainable statewide systems. And he's already looking at step one.
A cost share where the state helps offset the costs that the counties are bearing.
Because a lot of costs often come from outside the county.
93 and 75 are pretty dangerous because people like to speed on it. And people think just because they're straightaways they're NASCAR drivers.
It's left Lincoln County taxpayers funding EMS services for others.
The EMS coverage for the highway, interstate, whatever that runs through, you start to get to the point where it's like they can't do it. It's not possible.
There's a lot of nuance in the problems you face.
There are.
Just not enough to get too mixed up. Not yet.
It's just going to get spread thinner and thinner and thinner until either a service has to shut down, people get hurt and don't get timely care, you name it.
Mark says he's not for writing blank checks. If future legislation offers dollars to ensure EMT services across the state, like we do with police and fire, well, then he expects Lincoln County or anyone else benefiting to be held accountable for using those dollars correctly. And that concurrent resolution, Brian, is asking for that exactly, saying health and welfare, come to us, give us some answers. And that bureau has, been working on this for the last couple of years, trying to find information. But in that 2024 session, they're expected to come with some sort of a solution.
I know we've known about this for a couple of years. We've talked about it a couple times before. It's just crazy, though, that paramedics, emergency medical services are not included in the same umbrella of essential emergency services.
And responding to the same calls often,
Right.
Police, fire, an ambulance, they may all show up to the same call all at once. 2 of those 3 are considered essential. The state promises you these will exist in your community. EMS services are not the case.
All right, we'll see if lawmakers can come forward with something productive this next legislative session. Thank you, Andrew. It's not too often you get emotional when talking about technology, but when it's the first of something, like the first computer in Boise, it can kind of choke a guy up. Why don't you reach for that computer that's, within reach and share something with us? Your thoughts, your complaints, your comments on today's show. You can text them to us to the number on your screen, 208-321-5614. Also, include your name and the hashtag #the208 so we can share yours at the end of the show. If not, maybe we'll share them another day. We like to highlight Idaho's moments in history here on the 2-8, some of which are pretty obvious, like when we became a territory, when we became a state, the time we dropped beavers out of airplanes, and some of our lesser-known moments, like Boise's Spanish Village, or the time a Grangeville family mailed a little girl to her grandmother. One of those moments your 4th grade teacher may have skipped over in your state history curriculum was when, Boise entered into the modern age of computer technology. Modern age for that age, I should say. It was significant for several reasons, but probably more significant for one man with firsthand experience with the machine. Most people these days walk around with a personal computer in their purse or in their pocket or in their hand. But most people walking around downtown Boise these days probably wouldn't notice this sign saluting those first days.
The first computers in Boise City.
On the corner of 6th and Main, there's a plaque put there by Dr. Emerson Maxon.
I'd say that.
A member
Yes.
of the Association of Information Technology Professionals.
We have to remember something about us, and so we said, let's do a plaque.
It's about considering something of significance.
It was 66 years ago.
66 years ago.
Yeah.
That's because 67 years ago, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956.
The most talked about phase of the act is the interstate highway system, a 41,000-mile network of our most important roads.
Considered one of the greatest public works projects in our nation's history.
And they need computing to do the construction for the interstate highway system.
So, in this building, what used to house the Idaho Statesman, and in 1957 was home to the state's highway department, they brought in Boise's very first computer. That way, the engineers could focus on engineering instead of
calculating. Exactly.
The UNIVAC 120.
Universal Integrated Variable Access Computer.
And it was used to figure out how much dirt to take away or put in to make roads.
Add, subtract, multiply, and divide, that was the big deal.
It just couldn't work with big numbers. So 438 digits, like actual digits.
Digits.
That's it, 438.
That's it.
And it took a big old machine to do that.
It took a big machine to do that. And so you see the size of the man, that's probably about a 6x6 space.
That's the thing. Many people may not see the size of the man pictured on the plaque because they may not even notice the plaque.
There it is.
But one man,
so it was in this building here?
This building.
Certainly does.
This is the one.
Lynn Sherman is seeing this sign for the very first time. A surprisingly emotional moment.
Remington Rand UNIVAC.
You see, a while back,
3,200 pounds.
Thing was a monster.
It was a monster.
Lynn looked up the UNIVAC 120 on the internet.
And your goal was to find it and come here, and here we are.
At that point, it was find this plaque.
Here we are.
We made it to Boise. We found it.
It's everything I hoped for.
I'm just glad we could.
You may be wondering
bucket list
why an 85-year-old man might get so sentimental about a sign.
This was the very first time I ever touched a computer.
Back in January of 1960, a recent graduate of Boise Junior College, Lynn applied for a job with Idaho's Department of Highways. He was hired on the spot.
My job was to do highway design work, which I'd been doing manually for the highway department.
During those years, they were building the interstate between Oregon and Utah, and Lynn became the lone engineer working with the UNIVAC 120.
I think it took me 3 panels worth of programming to do the complete earthwork calculations that we had been doing by hand. I designed the cards, I built the patch panel, no manuals, there was no training, and I had to decipher by guess as to what the hieroglyphics meant on the patch panel.
To do that, Lynn spent a lot of time in the basement of this building.
I was probably here 20 hours a day sometimes.
Really?
Yep. I mean, I just love this place.
And it's what brought Lynn back to Boise for the first time since 1975.
I mean, I had to. I think about it so much. Because it's where all of this started. I had no clue what to do after college. There was something that I needed, and I found it here. And this place has haunted me. Because it was where I met computers for the first time. And it's set the course of my life.
So now you can see why one man...
I've been a computer nerd ever since I was January 2nd in this building.
...can be so sentimental about one sign.
This is just the beginning.
What a beginning it was. His job with Idaho's Department of Highways and working with the UNIVAC 120 led him to Oregon State University, where Lynn says he helped start their computer science center. It also led him to a 15-year career at Weyerhaeuser and another 20 years as a consultant with Boeing, where he is still gainfully employed. And he brought his work home with him in the form of some of the first personal computers and laptops the world's ever known, which rubbed off on his 2 sons, Brian and Carl, who were there with them on this trip to Boise, who also went on to work for Microsoft and IBM, respectively. So yeah, that plaque, that building, that 3,200-pound computer, even though they only worked on it and worked there for a short time, it all made quite the impact for one man who wasn't sure what he was going to do after Boise Junior College. You know, there may be some of you out there a little more tired than usual this morning or even this evening, maybe taking some cool pics of the full moon like we saw just then, staying up into the wee hours. Might as well watch the U.S. women's soccer team take on Portugal in the wee hours, right? The final game of the group stage. Not sure that cup of coffee hit well enough for that 1 a.m. kickoff, but when the World Cup is playing a day ahead down under, you got to do what you got to do to cheer on the team, right? And that means times of those games back here are a bit unusual, almost as unusual as the reminder to watch last night's or today's game sent out by the U.S. women's national soccer team. On Twitter, or X as you want to call it, they called on fans to set their alarms, get coffee ready, do what they got to do to get ready for the 1 a.m. start in Boise, which is somehow smack dab in the middle of the Clearwater National Forest up north. All of a sudden, they're not even in the same time zone as southern Idaho. Technically, that game would have been at 12 a.m. like Seattle, because that's where the time zone is. So while it's nice to be included in the Women's World Cup conversation, thanks to team member Sofia Huerta's link to the City of Trees, maybe you can ask her next time where Boise is actually. Oh, and if you didn't stay up late to watch that game, they tied it 0-0. So you didn't miss much, but they are advancing, landing them second place behind the Netherlands as they head into the elimination rounds. Their next game is coming up this Sunday at 5 a.m. Eastern, 3 a.m. Mountain Time, or 2 a.m. in Boise's new locale in the Panhandle. You know, we get this question a lot when we talk about abortion, like this one from Gordon says, Brian, where do the privacy laws come in the abortion issue? I guess those who write the laws and law enforcement side don't really look at, well, privacy when it comes to anybody who might be breaking the law. They kind of look past that at times. Okay, Idaho, time to legalize marijuana so we can allocate some of that $3 million a week to our local EMS services. Other areas that need funding, schools, teachers, separate bathrooms, et cetera. We the people. Also, our government should stay out of our personal health care. HIPAA, anyone? Again, the same comment, but if somebody's breaking the law, HIPAA doesn't really apply in all of those cases either. I want to end this one today, on this comment here because it kind of sums up why we do what we do. I want to thank you for this, Chrissy. Thank you again. The 208 helps remember why I care, which is kind of what we're trying to do here. Bring to light some things that you should care about if you didn't already, and remind you that, well, yeah, you probably should. We'll see you back here tomorrow.